Lucy Bostel could not control the glow of strange excitement under which she laboured, but she could put her mind on riding the Sage King. She did not realize, however, that she was riding him under the stress and spell of that excitement. She had headed out to make a short cut, fairly sure of her direction, that she was not unaware of the fact that she would be lost till she ran across her trail. That might be easy to miss, and time was flying. She put the king to a brisk trot, winding through the aisles of the sage. Soon she had left the monument region and was down on the valley floor again. From time to time she conquered a desire to look back. Presently she was surprised and very glad to ride into a trail where she saw the tracks she had made coming out. With much relief she turned Sage King into this trail, and then any anxiety she had felt left her entirely. But that did not mitigate her excitement. She eased the king into a long swinging lope, and as he warmed to the work she was aroused also. It was hard to hold him in, once he got out of the trot, and after miles and miles of this, when she thought best to slow down, he nearly pulled her arms off. Still she finally got him in hand. Then followed miles of soft and rough going, which seemed long and tedious. Beyond that was the home stretch up the valley, whose gradual slope could be seen only at a distance. Here was a straight and broad trail, not too soft nor too hard, and for all the years she could remember, riders had tried out and trained their favourites on that course. Lucy reached down to assure herself that the cinch was tight. Then she pulled her sombrero down hard, slackened the bridle, and let the king go. He simply broke his gait, he was so surprised. Lucy saw him trying to look back at her, as if he could not realize that this young woman rider had given him free rein. Perhaps one reason he disliked her had always been, and everlastingly, that tight rein. Like the wary horse he was, he took to a canter to try out what his new freedom meant. "Say, what's the matter with you?" called Lucy disdainfully. "Are you lazy? Or don't you believe I can ride you?" Whereupon she dug him with her spurs. Sage King snorted. His action shifted marvellously. Thunder rolled from under his hooves, and then he broke out of that clattering roar into his fleet stride, where his hoofbeats were swift, regular, rhythmic. Lucy rode him with teeth and fists clenched, bending low. After all, she thought it was no trick to ride him. In that gait he was dangerous, for a fall meant death, but he ran so smoothly that riding him was easy and certainly glorious. He went so fast that the wind blinded her. The trail was only a white streak in blurred grey. She could not get her breath. The wind seemed to whip the air away from her, and then she felt the lessening of the tremendous pace. Sage King had run himself out, and the miles were behind her. Gradually her sight became clear, and as the hot and wet horse slowed down, satisfied with his wild run, Lucy realized she was up on the slope only a few miles from home. Suddenly she thought she saw something dark stir behind a sagebrush just ahead. Before she could move a hand at the bridle, Sage King leaped with a frantic snort. It was a swerving, nimble, tremendous bound. He went high. Lucy was unseated, but somehow clung on, and came down with him, finding the saddle. And it seemed, while in the air, she saw a long, snaky, whipping loop of rope shoot out and close just where the Sage King's legs had been. She screamed. The horse broke and ran. Lucy, righting herself, looked back to see Joel Creech holding a limp lasso. He had tried to rope the king. The blood of her father was aroused in Lucy. She thought of the horse, not herself. If the king had not been so keen-sighted, so swift, he would have gone down with a broken leg. Lucy never in her life had been so furious. Joel shook his fist at her and yelled, "I'd have got you on any other hoss." She did not reply, though she had to fight herself to keep from pulling her gun and shooting at him. She guided the running horse back to the trail, rapidly leaving Creech out of sight. "He's gone crazy, that's sure," said Lucy, "and he means me harm." She ran the king clear up to the corrals, and he was still going hard when she turned down the lane to the barns. Then she pulled him in. Farlan was there to meet her. She saw no other riders and was glad. "Well, Miss Lucy, the king sure looks good," said Farlan as she jumped off and flung him the bridle. "Say, girl, you're all pale. Oh, say, you wasn't scared of the king now?" "No," replied Lucy, panting. "Well, what's up then?" The rider spoke in an entirely different voice, and into his clear hazel eyes a little dark gleam shot. "Joel Creech waylaid me out in the sage and tried to catch me." Lucy checked herself. It might not do to tell how Joel had tried to catch her. "He did? And you won the king?" Farlan laughed, as if relieved. "Well, he tried that before, Miss Lucy. But when you was up on the Grey, that Joel's crazy, sure." "He sure is. Farlan, I am mad." "Well, cool off, Miss Lucy. It ain't nothing to get set up about. And don't tell the old man." "Why not?" demanded Lucy. "Well, because he's been in a queer sort of bad mood lately. It wouldn't be safe. He hates them creatures. So don't tell him." "All right, Farlan, I won't. Don't you tell either," replied Lucy soberly. "Sure, I'll keep it mum. But if Joel doesn't watch out, I'll put a crimp in him myself." Lucy hurried away down the lane and entered the house without meeting anyone. In her room she changed her clothes and lay down to rest and think. Strangely enough, Lucy might never have encountered Joel Creech out in the sage, for all the thought she gave him. Her mind was busy with the crippled rider. Who was he? Where was he from? What strange passion he had shown over the recovery of that wonderful red horse. Lucy could not forget the feeling of his iron arm when he held her in a kind of frenzied gratitude. A wild upland rider living only for a wild horse. How like Indians some of these riders. Yet this fellow had seemed different from most of the uncouth riders she had known. He spoke better. He appeared to have at least some little schooling. Lucy did not realize that she was interested in him. She thought she was sorry for him and interested in the stallion. She began to compare Wildfire and Sage King, and if she remembered rightly, Wildfire, even in his dishevelled state, had appeared a worthy rival of the king. What would Bostel say at the sight of the flame-coloured stallion? Lucy was thrilled. Later she left her room to see if the hour was opportune for her plan to make up a pack of supplies for the rider. Her aunt was busy in the kitchen, and Bostel had not come in. Lucy took advantage of the moment to tie up a pack and carry it to her room. Somehow the task pleased her. She recalled the lean face of the rider, and that recalled his ragged appearance. Why not pack up an outfit of clothes? Bostel had a stockroom full of such accessories for his men. Then Lucy, glowing with the thought, hurried to Bostel's stockroom, and with deft hands and swift judgment selected an outfit for the rider, even down to a comb and razor. All this she carried quickly to her room, where in her thoughtfulness she added a bit of glass from a broken mirror and soap and a towel. Then she tied up a second pack. Bostel did not come home to supper, a circumstance that made Lucy's aunt cross. They ate alone, and, waiting a while, were rather late in clearing away the table. After this, Lucy had her chance in the dusk of early evening, and she carried both packs way out into the sage and left them near the trail. "Hope a coyote doesn't come along," she said. That possibility, however, did not worry her as much as getting those packs upon the king. How in the world would she ever do it? She hurried back to the house, stealthily keeping to the shadow of the cottonwoods, for she would have faced an embarrassing situation if she had met her father, even had he been in good humor. And she reached the sitting-room unobserved. The lamps had been lighted and a log blazed on the hearth. She was reading when Bostel entered. "Hello, Lucy," he said. He looked tired, and Lucy knew he had been drinking, because when he had been he never offered to kiss her. The strange, sombre shade was still on his face, but it brightened somewhat at the sight of her. Lucy greeted him as always.
"Farland tells me you handled the king great. Better'n Van has worked him lately," said Bostel. "Don't tell him I told you."
That was sweet praise from Farland. "Oh, Dad, it could hardly be true," expostulated Lucy. "Both you and Farland are a little sore at Van now."
"I'm a lot sore," replied Bostel gruffly.
"Anyhow, how did Farland know how I handled Sage King?" queried Lucy.
"While every hair on a hoss talks to Farland, so Holly says. Lucy, you take the king out every day for a while. Ride him now and watch out. Joel Creech was in the village today. He sure sneaked when he seen me. He's up to some mischief."
Lucy did not want to lie, and she did not know what to say. Presently Bostel bade her good night. Lucy endeavoured to read, but her mind continually wandered back to the adventure of the day. Next morning she had difficulty in concealing her impatience, but luck favoured her. Bostel was not in evidence, and Farland, for once, could spare no more time than it took to saddle Sage King. Lucy rode out into the sage pretty sure that no one watched her. She had hidden the packs near the tallest bunch of greasewood along the trail, and when she halted behind it she had no fear of being seen from the corrals. She got the packs. The light one was not hard to tie back of the saddle, but the large one was a very different matter. She decided to carry it up front. There was a good-sized rock near, upon which she stepped, leading Sage King alongside, and after an exceedingly trying moment she got up, holding the pack. For a wonder, Sage King behaved well. Then she started off, holding the pack across her lap, and she tried the king's several gaits to see which one would lend itself more comfortably to the task before her. The trouble was that Sage King had no slow gait, even his walk was fast. And Lucy was compelled to hold him to that. She wanted to hurry, but that seemed out of the question. She tried to keep from gazing out toward the monuments because they were so far away. How would she find the crippled rider? It flashed into her mind that she might find him dead, and this seemed horrible. But her common sense persuaded her that she would find him alive and better. The pack was hard to hold, and Sage King fretted at the monotonous walk. The hours dragged, the sun grew hot, and it was noon almost when she reached the point where she cut off the trail to the left. Thereafter, with the monument standing ever higher, and the distance perceptibly lessening, the minutes passed less tediously. At length she reached the zone of lofty rocks, and found them different how, she could not tell. She rode down among them, and was glad when she saw the huge mittens, her landmarks. At last she espied the green-bordered wash and the few cedar trees. Then a horse blazed red against the sage, and another shone black. That sight made Lucy thrill. She rode on, eager now, but moved by the strangeness of the experience. Before she got quite close to the cedar, she saw a man. He took a few slow steps out of the shade. His back was bent. Lucy recognized the rider, and in her gladness to see him on his feet she cried out. Then, when Sage King reached the spot, Lucy rolled the pack off to the ground. "Oh, that was a job!" she cried. The rider looked up with eyes that seemed keener, less staring than she remembered. "You came? I was afraid you wouldn't," he said. "Sure I came." "You're better? Not badly hurt?" she said gravely. I'm so glad." "I've got a crimp in my back, that's all." Lucy was quick to see that after the first glance at her he was all eyes for Sage King. She laughed. How like a rider. She watched him, knowing that presently he would realize what a horse she was riding. She slipped off and threw the bridle, and then, swiftly untying the second pack, she laid it down. The rider, with slow, painful steps and bent back, approached Sage King and put a lean, strong, brown hand on him, and touched him as if he wished to feel if he were real. Then he whistled softly. When he turned to Lucy, his eyes shone with a beautiful light. "It's Sage King, Bostel's favorite," said Lucy.
Sage King? He looks it, but never a wild horse?
"No."
A fine horse, replied the rider. Of course he can run.
This last held a note of a rider's jealousy. Lucy laughed. "Run? The king is Bostel's favorite. He can run away from any horse in the uplands."
"I'll bet you Wildfire can beat him," replied the rider with a dark glance.
"Come on," cried Lucy daringly. Then the rider and girl looked more earnestly at each other. He smiled in a way that changed his face, brightened out all the hardness.
"I reckon I'll have to crawl," he said ruefully. "But maybe I can ride in a few days, if you'll come back again."
His remark brought to Lucy the idea that of course she would hardly see this rider again after today. Even if he went to the ford, which event was unlikely, he would not remain there long. The sensation of blankness puzzled her, and she felt an unfamiliar confusion. I brought you some things," she said, pointing to the larger pack.
"Grub, you mean?"
"No."
"That was all I asked you for, miss," he said somewhat stiffly.
"Yes, but I thought—" Lucy became unaccountably embarrassed. Suppose this strange rider would be offended. "Your clothes were so torn, and no wonder you were thrown in those boots, so I thought I'd—"
"You thought I needed clothes as bad as grub," he said bitterly. "I reckon that's so."
His look more than his tone cut Lucy, and involuntarily she touched his arm. "Oh, you won't refuse to take them? Please don't." At her touch a warmth came to his face.
"Take them? I should smile I will."
He tried to reach down and lift the pack, but as it was obviously painful for him to bend, Lucy intercepted him. "But you've had no breakfast," she protested. "Why not eat before you open that pack?"
"Nope, I'm not hungry. Maybe I'll eat a little after I dress up."
He started to walk away, then turned.
"Miss Bostel, have you been so good to every wandering rider you happen to run across?"
"Good?" she exclaimed, flushing. She dropped her eyes before his. "Nonsense. Anyway, you're the first wandering rider I've ever met, like this."
"Well, you're good," he replied with emotion.
Then he walked away with slow, stiff steps and disappeared behind the willows in the little hollow. Lucy uncoiled the rope on her saddle and haltered Sage King on the best grass near at hand. Then she opened the pack of supplies, thinking the while that she must not tarry here long. But on the king I can run back like the wind," she mused. The pack contained dried fruits and meat and staples, also an assortment of good things to eat that were of a perishable nature, already much the worse for the long ride. She spread all this out in the shade of the cedar. The utensils were few, 2 cups, 2 pans, and a tiny pot. She gathered wood and arranged it for a fire, so that the rider could start it as soon as he came back. He seemed long in coming. Lucy waited, yet still he did not return. Finally she thought of the red stallion, and started off down the wash to take a look at him. He was grazing. He had lost some of the dirt and dust and the beraggled appearance. When he caught sight of her, he lifted his head high and whistled. Oh, how wild he looked! And his whistle was shrill, clear, strong. Both the other horses answered it. Lucy went on closer to Wildfire. She was fascinated now. "If he doesn't know me," she cried. Never had she been so pleased. She had expected every sign of savageness on his part, and certainly had not intended to go near him. But Wildfire did not show fear or hate in his recognition. Lucy went directly to him and got a hand on him. Wildfire reared a little and shook a little, but this disappeared presently under her touch. He held his head very high and watched her with wonderful eyes. Gradually she drew his head down. Standing before him, she carefully and slowly changed the set of the hackamore which had made a welt on his nose. It seemed to have been her good fortune that every significant move she had made around the stallion had been to mitigate his pain. Lucy believed he knew this as well as she knew it. Her theory, an often disputed one, was that horses were as intelligent as human beings, and had just the same fears, likes, and dislikes. Lucy knew she was safe when she untied the lasso from the strong root where she had fastened it, and led the stallion down the wash to a pool of water. And she stood beside him with a hand on his shoulder while he bent his head to sniff at the water. He tasted it plainly with disgust. It was stagnant water full of vermin. But finally he drank. Lucy led him up the wash to another likely place and tied him securely. When she got back to the camp in the cedars, the rider was there, on his knees kindling the fire. His clean-shaved face and new apparel made him vastly different. He was young, and had he not been so gaunt, he would have been fine-looking, Lucy thought. "Wildfire remembered me," Lucy burst out. "He wasn't a bit scary. Let me handle him, followed me to water."
"He's taken to you," replied the rider seriously. "I've heard of the like, but not so quick. Was he in a bad fix when you got to him yesterday?"
Lucy explained briefly.
"Ha! If that red devil has any love in him, I'll never get it. I wish I could have done so much for him, but always when he sees me he'll remember."
Lucy saw that the rider was in difficulties. He could not bend his back, and evidently it pained him to try. His brow was moist. "Let me do that," she said.
"Thanks. Took all of my strength to get into this new outfit," he said, relinquishing his place to Lucy.
When she looked up from her task, presently he was sitting in the shade of the cedar, watching her. He had the expression of a man who hardly believed what he saw.
"Did you have any trouble getting away without telling about me?" he asked.
"No. But I sure had a job with those packs," she replied.
"You must be a wonder with a horse."
As far as vanity was concerned, Lucy had only one weakness, and he had touched upon it. "Well, Dad and Holly and Farlin argue much about me. Still, I guess they all agree I can ride."
"Holly and Farlin are riders?" he questioned.
"Yes, Dad's right-hand men."
"Your dad hires many riders, I suppose?"
"Sure, I never heard of him turning any rider down, at least not without a try."
"I wonder if he would give me a job."
Lucy glanced up quickly. The idea surprised her, pleased her. "In a minute," she replied, "and he'd be grand to see you. You see, he'd have an eye for Wildfire." The rider nodded his head as if he understood how that would be. "And of course you'd never sell nor trade Wildfire?" went on Lucy. The rider's smile was sad, but it was conclusive. "Then you'd better stay away from Boston," replied Lucy shortly. He remained silent, and Lucy, busy about the campfire, did not speak again till the simple fare was ready. Then she spread a tarpaulin in the shade. "I'm pretty hungry myself," she said, "but I don't suppose I know what hunger is."
"After a while a fellow loses the feeling of hunger," he replied. "I reckon it'll come back. This all looks good."
So they began to eat. Lucy's excitement, her sense of the unreality of this adventure, in no wise impaired her appetite. She seemed acutely sensitive to the perceptions of the moment. The shade of the cedars was cool, and out on the desert she could see the dark smoky veils of heat lifting. The breeze carried a dry odor of sand and grass. She heard bees humming by, and all around the great isolated monument stood up, red tops against the blue sky. It was a silent, dreaming, impressive place, where she felt unlike herself. "I mustn't stay long," she said, suddenly remembering.
"Will you Come back again? He asked.
The question startled Lucy. Why, I don't know. Won't you ride into the forge just as soon as you're able?
I reckon not.
But it's the only place where there's people in hundreds of miles. Surely you won't try to go back the way you came?
Well, when Wildfire left that country, I left it. We can't go back.
Then you've no people? No one you care for? She asked in sweet seriousness.
There's no one. I'm an orphan. My people were lost in an Indian massacre, with a wagon train crossing Wyoming. Few escaped, and I was one of the youngsters. I had a tough time like a stray dog till I grew up, and then I took to the desert.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry, replied Lucy. But that's not very different from my dad's story of his early years. What will you do now?
I'll stay here till my back straightens out. Will you ride out again?
Yes, replied Lucy without looking at him, and she wondered if it were really she who was speaking. Then he asked her about the ford and Boston and the ranches and the villages north, and the riders and the horses. Lucy told him everything she knew and could think of, and lastly, after waxing eloquent on the horses of the uplands, particularly Bostals, she gave him a graphic account of courts and Dick Sears.
"Horse thieves!" exclaimed the rider darkly. There was a grimness as well as fear in his tone. "I've heard of Sears, but not courts. Where does this band hang out?"
"No one knows. Holly says they hide up in the canyon country. None of the riders have ever tried to track them far. It would be useless. Holly says there are plateaus of rich grass and green forests. The Ute Indians say that much too, but we know little about the wild country."
"Aren't there any hunters at Bostel's Ford?"
"Wild horse hunters, you mean?"
"No. Bear and deer hunters."
"There's none, and I suppose that's why we're not familiar with the wild canyon country. I'd like to ride in there some time in camp, but our people don't go in for that. They love the open ranges. No one I know, except a half-witted boy, ever rode down among those monuments. And how wonderful a place! It can't be more than 20 miles from home. Oh, I must be going soon. I'm forgetting Sage King. Did I tell you I was training him for the races?"
"No, you didn't. What races? Tell me," he replied with keen interest.
Then Lucy told him about the great passion of her father, about the long, time-honored custom of free-for-all races, and the great races that had been run in the past, about the Creeches and their swift horses, about the rivalry and speculation and betting, and lastly about the races to be run in a few weeks, races so wonderful in prospect that even the horse-thief courts had begged to be allowed to attend.
"I'm going to see the king beat Creech's roan," shouted the rider, with red in his cheeks and a flash in his eye.
His enthusiasm warmed Lucy's interest, yet it made her thoughtful. Ideas flashed into her mind. If the rider attended the races, he would have that fleet stallion with him. He could not be separated from the horse that had cost him so dearly. What would Bostel and Holly and Farland say at the sight of Wildfire? Suppose Wildfire was to enter the races? It was probable that he could run away from the whole field, even beat the king. Lucy thrilled and thrilled. What a surprise it would be! She had the rider's true love of seeing the unheralded horse win over the favorite. She had for years wanted to see a horse, and ride a horse, out in front of Sage King. Then suddenly all these flashing ideas coruscated seemingly into a gleam, a leaping, radiant, wonderful thought. Irresistibly it burst from her. "Let me ride your Wildfire in the great race!" she cried breathlessly. His response was instantaneous, a smile that was keen and sweet and strong, and a proffered hand. Impulsively Lucy clasped that hand with both hers. "You don't mean it," she said. "Oh, it's what Auntie would call one of my wild dreams. and I'm growing up, they say, but oh, if I could ride Wildfire against the field in that race, if only I could!"
She was on fire with the hope, flushing, tingling. She was unconscious of her effect upon the rider, who gazed at her with a newborn light in his eyes. "You can ride him. I reckon I'd like to see that race just as much as Bostel or Courts or any man. And see here, girl, Wildfire can beat this gray racer of your father's."
"Oh!" cried Lucy.
"Wildfire can beat the king," repeated the rider intensely. "A tame horse doesn't step on this earth that can outrun Wildfire. He's a stallion. He has been a killer of horses. It's in him to kill. If he ran a race, it would be that instinct in him."
"How can we plan it?" went on Lucy impulsively. She had forgotten to withdraw her hands from his. "It must be a surprise, a complete surprise. If you came to the ford, we couldn't keep it a secret, and Dad or Fallen would prevent me somehow."
"It's easy. Ride out here as often as you can. Bring a light saddle and let me put you up on Wildfire. You'll run 'em, train 'em, get 'em in shape. Then the day of the races or the night before I'll go out and hide in the sage till you come or send for Wildfire."
"Oh, it'll be glorious!" she cried with eyes like stars. "I know just where to have you hide. A pile of rocks near the race course. There's a spring and good grass. I could ride out to you just before the big race, and we'd come back with me on Wildfire. The crowd always stays at the end of the race course, only the starters stay out there. Oh, I can see Bostel when that red stallion runs into sight."
"Well, is it settled?"
queried the rider strangely. Lucy was startled into self-consciousness by his tone. How strangely he must have felt, and his eyes were piercing. "You mean that I ride Wildfire?" she replied shyly. "Yes, if you'll let me."
"I'd be proud."
"You're very good. And do you think Wildfire can beat the king?"
"I know it."
"How do you?"
"I've seen both horses."
"But it will be a grand race."
"I reckon so. It's likely to be the grandest ever seen. But Wildfire will win because he's run wild all his life, and run to kill other horses. The only question is, can you ride him?"
"Yes. I never saw the horse I couldn't ride. Bostel says there are some I can't ride. Farland says not. Only 2 horses have thrown me, the king and Sarchedon, but that was before they knew me, and I was sort of wild. I can make your Wildfire love me."
"That's the last part of it I'd ever doubt," replied the rider. "It's settled then. I'll camp here. I'll be well in a few days. Then I'll take Wildfire in hand. You will ride out whenever you have the chance without being seen, and the 2 of us will train the stallion to upset that race."
"Yes, then, it's settled." Lucy's gaze was impelled and held by the rider's. Why was he so pale? But then he had been injured, weakened. This compact between them had somehow changed their relation. She seemed to have known him long. "What's your name?" she asked.
"Lin Slone,"
replied the rider. Then she released her hands. "I must ride in now. If this isn't a dream, I'll come back soon." She led Sage King to a rock and mounted him.
"It's good to see you up there," said Slone. "And that splendid horse. He knows what he is. It'll break Bostel's heart to see that horse beat."
"Dad'll feel bad, but it'll do him good," replied Lucy.
It was the old rider's ruthless spirit speaking out of his daughter's lips.
Slone went close to the king, and, putting a hand on the pommel, he looked up at Lucy.
Maybe it is a dream, and you won't come back," he said with unsteady voice.
"Then I'll come in dreams," she flashed. "Be careful of yourself. Goodbye." And at a touch the impatient king was off. From far up the slope near a monument Lucy looked back. Slone was watching her. She waved a gauntleted hand, and then looked back no more.